When a software engineer sits down to build an app, they usually talk about building the full stack, right?
Yeah, exactly. The front end, the back end, all of it.
Right. So they design the database at the back, the logic in the middle, all the way up to those, shiny interface buttons you click on your screen.
And it's a completely enclosed system. A change in the foundational code dictates exactly how that final button behaves.
Exactly. But, what if the app being built isn't just like a food delivery service?
Yeah.
What if the app is human civilization?
Well, then the stakes get infinitely higher.
Right, because what if a bug in the code doesn't just crash your phone, but actually buries scholars alive or starves millions of people?
Yeah, that is the dark side of this.
Welcome to the terrifying world of full-stack civilizational engineering. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a really profound essay by Elias Kunis.
It's a brilliant piece of writing.
It really is. And the core argument is that the most powerful and honestly the most dangerous thing humans do is attempt to design society from absolute first principles.
And it is a massive undertaking to even conceptualize. But whether you realize it or not, you are living inside one of these engineered stacks right now.
I think that's the part that really stuck with me. We're in it.
We are. So Kunis breaks down the architecture of any civilization into 5 distinct layers.
Walk us through those layers, like what's at the very bottom?
So at the very bottom of the foundational database, you have ontology. This defines what is, fundamentally real.
Okay, so the core truth of the universe, basically.
Exactly. Then above that is language, which are the concepts that bear the weight of that reality.
Right.
Next is diagnostics. These are the tools used to identify what is actually broken in the world.
And once you diagnose the problem, you need a way to fix it.
Right, which brings us to the 4th layer. Mechanism. The actual institutions designed to implement the fix.
Okay, on the top layer.
Sitting at the top, like the buttons on your screen, you have reform. That's the specific policies implemented in the real world.
So normally people just specialize in one of these, right? Like a philosopher writes a dense book about ontology.
Oh, sure. And a policy analyst proposes a new mechanism for a tax bracket.
Right. They are working on completely different floors of the building. They rarely talk to each other.
But a true full-stack engineer connects that foundational metaphysics at the bottom directly to the administrative code at the top.
Which means everything is linked.
Completely linked. And when a civilization is built this way, the stack becomes a massive amplifier.
An amplifier? How so?
It takes whatever base assumption you started with at the bottom, layer your ontology, and blasts it into every single domain of human coordination.
Wow. So a minor error in the ontology doesn't just stay in a philosophical treatise.
No, it infects the entire society. It scales up massively.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how this amplifier works in practice, we need to look at a stack that actually successfully conquered the modern world.
Oh, you're talking about Jeremy Bentham.
Yes, late 18th century. He built his entire civilizational stack on the ontology of individual utility.
And Bentham's foundational database was ruthlessly simple. He believed that individual sensation is the only measurable reality.
Right. Didn't he explicitly write that nature placed mankind under the governance of just 2 sovereign masters?
Yeah, pain and pleasure. That was it. Nothing else was real to him.
So I read that to make this work across all of society, he created a linguistic tool called periphrasis.
Yes, periphrasis. It's a fascinating concept.
But I struggled to visualize how that physically worked in his writing. Like, how does a language tool actually destroy an abstract concept like human rights?
Well, periphrasis is essentially a method of linguistic demolition.
Linguistic demolition, I like that.
Bentham argued that if a concept cannot be translated or, paraphrased into a sentence describing physical pain or pleasure, it is a fiction and must be discarded.
Oh, wow. So no room for abstract ideals at all.
None. So if you try to talk about natural law or civic duty, Bentham forces you to rewrite that sentence using only the metrics of individual physical utility.
And if you can't?
If you can't, the concept is literally deleted from the civilization's vocabulary. He basically wanted to turn human existence into a giant solvable spreadsheet.
Just optimizing purely for measurable happiness.
Exactly.
Which, sounds incredibly efficient on paper, but turning society into a spreadsheet has consequences.
What's fascinating here is how that spreadsheet approach categorizes what matters and what doesn't. Kunis labels this a type 3 failure.
A type 3 failure.
Right, or the trap of legibility. Bentham's ontology actually gave us modern economics.
Really? Like the whole system?
Basically, yeah. It gave us cost-benefit analysis and the use of GDP as a proxy for a nation's well-being. He made the messy world legible to bureaucrats.
But there's a downside to that legibility, isn't there?
A massive one. A single overriding metric acts like a flamethrower on society.
It just burns away everything it cannot measure.
Yes. Concepts like dignity, cultural cohesion, intergenerational continuity, or even just a sense of meaning.
Because none of those leave a clean utility signature on a spreadsheet.
Right. And because the system cannot measure them, it becomes completely blind to them.
So the civilization basically acts like a machine optimizing for a single variable.
Exactly. And in doing so, it consumes the unmeasurable, invisible substrate that actually keeps the society functioning.
You know, if you work at a modern corporation, you are probably living inside Bentham's failed experiment right now.
Oh, absolutely. The corporate world is built on this.
Think about your company's KPIs, those key performance indicators. The executives manage the company strictly by quarterly profits and efficiency metrics.
And they completely ignore whether the employees actually hate working there.
Right. Or if institutional knowledge is being lost because people are burning out, they just optimize the numbers until the foundation abruptly crumbles and everyone quits.
That is the perfect micro example of a type 3 failure. And, Bentham wanted to scale that up to a terrifying degree.
Oh, the industry houses thing.
Yes. He literally proposed managing the poor of England through a joint stock company operating 250 industry houses to systematically process human beings into productive utility.
That is incredibly dark. So Bentham's system breaks down because it simply ignores anything that doesn't fit on the spreadsheet.
Right. It just goes blind to reality.
But what happens if you build a stack that doesn't just ignore unmeasurable variables, but actually views any deviation from the plan as an active threat?
Well, then you transition from a system that is merely blind to a system that is actively violent.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's rewind to ancient China, around 300 BCE.
Okay, we are going way back.
Yeah, we have the philosopher Xunzi, and his base ontology was the complete opposite of Bentham's neutral utility.
Very different, yeah.
His foundational assumption was human nature is evil, goodness results from conscious activity.
And Xunzi built an incredibly complex stack to manage that inherently evil nature. His mechanism layer relied on a careful balance of two forces.
What were they?
First, there was Li, which translates roughly to social ritual, morality, and cultural coordination.
Okay, so the social glue. And the second?
The second was Fa, which represents state law, administrative power, and harsh punishment.
So if he designed this careful balance of cultural ritual and strict law, how did his blueprint lead directly to the Qin dynasty?
It's a great question.
Because that was a regime famous for burning books, burying scholars alive, and literally collapsing in blood within just a few decades.
Yeah, the mechanism broke down due to what the essay calls lossy compression.
Lossy compression, like when you compress an audio file and it sounds terrible?
Exactly like that. You lose essential data. Xunzi designed the full nuanced stack, but he handed it down to his students, specifically Han Feizi and Lis.
And they were the ones who actually implemented it in the real world.
Right. And when they built the state machinery, they looked at the stack and decided to just strip with this lie the cultural coordination.
Oh, they just got rid of the social glue.
Yes. They kept only the brutal state power. They kept only the stick.
Well, I mean, I guess if your foundational ontology is that human nature is evil, you don't really trust social glue anyway, right?
Exactly. You just trust the stick.
Wow.
And that leads to the type 4V failure mode. Self-sealing.
Self-sealing, how does that work?
Because the core assumption is that humans are inherently evil, the system leaves no room for legitimate dissent.
So you can't disagree with the government at all?
Not at all. Imagine you are a citizen pointing out a flaw in, say, an irrigation policy.
In a functional system, that's just valuable feedback, right?
Sure. But in the Qin dynasty's self-sealing stack, your pushback is simply viewed as proof of your evil nature trying to subvert the conscious goodness of the state.
So you aren't raising a valid concern. You are just a broken gear that needs to be smashed.
Exactly. The system explains away its own structural flaws by punishing the victims of those flaws.
It's like that old joke. The beatings will continue until morale improves, but executed on a civilizational scale.
And it was devastating. It resulted in collective punishment, forced labor, and hundreds of thousands of deaths.
All from that one core assumption.
Yes. The Qin dynasty lasted only 15 years before the internal pressure caused a total collapse. The designers operated as unconstrained sage kings with zero error correction.
That is such a fascinating contrast. I mean, Bentham gives us the Type 3 legibility failure, a civilization that goes blind.
Right, the spreadsheet blindness.
And the Qin dynasty gives us the type 4 self-sealing failure, a civilization that goes deaf to feedback.
Yes, deafness versus blindness.
So,
Oh.
what happens if a civilization manages to do both at the same time?
Well, then you get the most comprehensive, architecturally ambitious, and ultimately catastrophic full-stack implementation in human history.
Oh boy, which one is that?
The Soviet Union under the principles of dialectical materialism.
Let's focus strictly on the structural engineering of this, just to remain entirely impartial on the history itself. Marx's foundational ontology posited that history is driven purely by material conditions and class relations, right?
Yes, that was the base database. The economic base dictates absolutely everything about the cultural and ideological superstructure.
Okay, so how did they diagnose problems?
The diagnostics of that stack focused entirely on exploitation, specifically capital extracting surplus value from labor.
Got it. So how did the implementation fail structurally?
The Soviet implementation is a masterclass in architectural collapse because it suffered from both blindness and deafness simultaneously. Let's look at the legibility trap first.
The Bentham spreadsheet problem.
Exactly. To centrally plan a massive national economy, the state requires absolute visibility. The essay references the political scientist James C. Scott and his concept of metis.
Metis. What is that?
It translates roughly to local practical knowledge.
So how does central planning actually destroy metis in practice?
Consider Soviet agricultural collectivization. You have bureaucrats sitting in Moscow looking at a master spreadsheet.
Okay.
They send out universal directives on exactly how deep to plant seeds and on what specific dates to plant them.
But they are in Moscow. They don't know the soil in some distant village.
Precisely. They completely ignore the local knowledge of the farmers who know the specific soil conditions, the microclimates, the historical weather patterns of their specific valley.
Right, the stuff that doesn't fit on the spreadsheet.
The center can only process standardized data, so it forces the messy reality of nature to fit the spreadsheet.
And when the seeds fail to grow because the directive made no sense for that specific soil, the spreadsheet fails.
That's the blindness.
Okay, but what about the deafness? Why couldn't the farmers just tell Moscow the plan was flawed? Like, hey, the seeds aren't growing here.
Because of the mechanism they built, the Vanguard Party.
Ah.
This is where the self-sealing failure kicks in. According to their foundational ontology, history is purely a material struggle of classes.
Right.
Therefore, any resistance to the Vanguard Party's plan cannot possibly be legitimate feedback about soil conditions. It must be categorized as false consciousness.
Wow. So if a farmer says this planting schedule will cause a famine, the local commissar doesn't check this out.
No, the commissar says, your brain is infected by bourgeoisie ideas, and you are actively trying to sabotage the revolution.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the architectural failure is absolute.
Completely absolute. The legibility trap destroys the local information the system desperately needs to survive.
And then the self-sealing ideology destroys the communication channels that would have warned the planners they were flying blind in the first place.
Exactly. When you eliminate dissent, you don't just eliminate political opposition, you eliminate the basic mechanism of error correction.
Millions of people suffered because the stack structurally forbade the system from admitting it had made a mistake.
Yes.
It's like a doctor who prescribes the wrong medication, and when the patient starts seizing, the doctor says, that just proves the disease is trying to trick me. Double the dose.
That is a horrifying but very accurate analogy.
It is a terrifying way to run a society, but it leads to a very natural engineering question, I think.
Which is,
If the fatal flaw of central planning is a lack of accurate feedback, couldn't modern technology fix that? Like, what if you gave the spreadsheet a real-time nervous system?
well, that exact hypothesis was tested in Chile in the early 1970s.
Really? Under Salvador Allende?
Yes, with the help of a British cybernetician named Stafford.
The Cybersyn project. I've read about this. This might be the most sci-fi governance attempt in history.
Oh, it really was.
They built a literal operations room that looked like the bridge of Star Trek's Enterprise, complete with these like futuristic chairs and screens.
The visual is incredible.
Yeah.
But the goal was very serious. They wanted to manage the Chilean economy using a network of telex machines, sending real-time data from factory floors directly to the presidential palace.
So real-time feedback, fixing the Soviet delay problem.
Right. Stafford designed an incredibly rigorous architectural framework called the Viable System Model. He knew that error correction was the fatal flaw of past systems.
So he tried to hard-code it into the stack.
Exactly. He built it directly into the code. He designed what he called algedonic loops.
Algedonic loops, I love that term. How did an algedonic loop actually function on the factory floor?
It was essentially designed as an automatic distress signal.
Okay.
So if a specific metric at a local factory, say copper output or machine functionality, fell outside of an acceptable mathematical range, the system would wait a specific amount of time for the local manager to fix it.
And if they couldn't fix it?
If it wasn't fixed in time, the algedonic loop would automatically trigger an alert to the next level of management. And that would continue all the way up to the operations room in the Capitol.
So it bypassed human bureaucracy entirely.
Right, to ensure the central planners always had accurate, real-time distress signals.
But, I mean, there is a massive vulnerability there, isn't there?
What do you see?
The mathematics assume the inputs are honest. But who is actually entering the data into the telex machine? A human being who is probably terrified of their boss. If my factory is failing, and I know the president of the country is going to see my failure on a giant screen in the Capitol, I am going to falsify the data before it ever triggers the loop.
You've identified the type I failure. Capture.
Capture, meaning the system gets hijacked.
Essentially, yes. The system suffered from profound structural naivety. Even with a brilliant, mathematically perfect cybernetic stack, if the people being evaluated are the ones who control the information going to the evaluator.
Then the system is instantly captured by self-interest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how sophisticated the database is if the data entry is corrupt.
Wow. Now, Cybersyn was destroyed by a military coup before its internal contradictions could fully collapse the economy, right?
Yes, historically it was cut short. But the engineering failure was already baked into the architecture. You simply can't code away human nature.
And you also can't just ignore human politics entirely, which I think leads us to our final failure mode, right?
Yes. Type 2, irrelevance.
How does irrelevance destroy a stack?
Well, look at the 1930s. A movement called Technocracy Inc. gained massive popularity in North America.
Technocracy Inc. I've heard the name.
Their ontology was that all human value should be measured in units of energy.
Wait, like literal energy?
Yes. They proposed replacing the entire price system, getting rid of all politicians, and having society administered purely by engineers, measuring absolutely everything in joules.
Which falls right back into Bentham's trap. Measuring everything in joules makes all non-energy value totally invisible.
Exactly. But they failed structurally in a different way.
How so?
They completely refused to engage in coalition building, persuasion, or the messy reality of political compromise.
They just thought they were right and that was enough.
They believed their system was mathematically superior, so they thought it should just be implemented by fiat.
But that's not how human societies actually work.
No, it's not. While Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal offered pragmatic political solutions to the Great Depression, Technocracy Inc. simply faded into total obscurity.
Because refusing to engage with politics is not a functional political strategy.
Precisely. They made themselves irrelevant.
So what does this all mean? We are looking at a deeply grim track record here.
It's not a very uplifting history.
No. Bentham creates this invisible cage of metrics that hollows out society. The Qin dynasty and the Soviets build self-sealing doom loops that punish people for the system's own errors.
Right.
Cybersyn's cybernetic dream gets captured by basic human fear. And Technocracy Inc. tries to replace politics with joules and literally vanishes into irrelevance.
They all hit catastrophic bugs in the code.
So looking at this whole graveyard of engineered societies, shouldn't we just stop trying? I mean, isn't it safer to let institutions naturally drift and evolve without trying to master plan the whole stack?
This raises an important question. Is abandoning the drafting table actually a safer choice?
It feels safer right now.
Kunis makes a really compelling argument that it isn't. When we let institutions drift, we don't avoid living in a stack. We just end up living in one that nobody is actively monitoring.
Oh, I see.
The society unknowingly consumes its own substrate, guided by mechanisms that have completely diverged from their original purposes.
Like a plane flying with a broken autopilot. It is still flying, but it's eventually going to crash.
Exactly. If we don't consciously engineer the alignment of our institutions, we become victims of whatever random invisible stack happens to form through historical accident.
Kunis frames this civilizational challenge as being structurally identical to the AI alignment problem, doesn't he?
Yes, and I think it's a brilliant comparison. When you build an institution, you are essentially building an artificial superintelligence.
Because it operates above the human level.
Right. It has an optimization target, a model of the world, and massive power to reshape its environment.
So the existential question is, how do you build a superintelligence that optimizes for what you actually want, rather than some flawed proxy?
Yes, it is the classic King Midas problem.
Midas wanted wealth, so he created a rule that turned everything he touched into gold.
And he optimized perfectly for his single metric.
And he starved to death because his food turned into gold.
Exactly. That is Bentham optimizing for utility until society hollows itself out.
So if we have to build the stack, because drifting is just as dangerous, and the historical models are all flawed, how do we actually survive?
Well, the essay synthesizes all these historical failures into essentially a survival guide. A functional civilizational stack requires 4 specific architectural constraints.
Okay, lay them out for us. What is the first constraint?
The first is bidirectional error correction that the designer fundamentally cannot override.
Bidirectional error correction. So no more unconstrained sage kings or vanguard parties dictating reality.
Exactly. If you build the system, you have to build constitutional separations or sunset clauses that allow the system to check your own power.
You have to be able to be wrong. Okay, what is the second constraint?
The second constraint is that the system must be grounded in harsh physical reality, not psychology or ideology.
Meaning what exactly?
You cannot base your system on something like utility, because human preferences constantly change. And you cannot base it on a classal society, because that ignores basic biological incentive structures.
So what do you base it on?
The stack must be bounded by hard limits, energy constraints, demographics, and ecological thresholds.
Because physics does not care about your political platform or your spreadsheet. It is the ultimate hard limit.
Precisely.
All right, third constraint.
Third is the absolute preservation of individual sovereignty.
Like civil liberties.
Yes, but this is not just a moral argument about liberty. It is a strict engineering necessity.
How so?
A system needs variance to adapt to new environments. If you crush individual agency, like the Soviets and the Qin dynasty did, you destroy the localized innovation required to survive unexpected crises.
Ah, I get it. You need the farmers to be free to experiment with seed spacing when the climate changes, instead of waiting for Moscow to tell them what to do.
Exactly. You need the menace.
Got it. And the final constraint.
The mechanism must openly expose its objective function.
Meaning it has to be honest about what it's trying to do.
Yes. It cannot smuggle its goals into society under the guise of neutral science or inevitable history.
Which brings us back to politics.
Right. Politics is the mechanism by which a society publicly owns its objective function. It's how we debate the hard trade-offs between things like trust, legitimacy, and acceptable sacrifice.
So a functional full stack optimizes the political process. It doesn't pretend politics doesn't exist, like the technocrats did.
Exactly.
Man, this has been a monumental journey.
It covers a lot of ground.
We started with the concept of a full stack as a massive amplifier, taking a core philosophy and echoing it through every single level of society.
And we saw the damage that can do.
Right. We explored how Bentham's legibility trap made the unmeasurable invisible. We analyzed the self-sealing disasters of the Qin dynasty and the Soviet Union, where feedback was literally treated as treason.
And we saw how Cybersyn's technological dream was captured by human fear.
Right, and we arrived at this really profound realization that governance is ultimately an engineering problem of alignment.
The civilizations that failed to engineer their own maintenance, that failed to build error correction into their source code, they are the ones that no longer exist. The stakes are total.
So to you listening right now, the next time you're sitting in a meeting looking at quarterly projections or, reading a new piece of local legislation, ask yourself, what is the invisible ontology driving this?
Are we optimizing for a spreadsheet proxy while quietly ignoring the cultural substrate that actually keeps the community running?
Kunis leaves us with a brilliant metaphor to solidify this whole concept.
Yes, the bridge metaphor. It's perfect.
You don't trust a bridge because the architect was a good person with noble intentions. You trust a bridge because it was rigorously load tested by someone entirely independent of the architect.
So as you navigate your week, ask yourself, who is load testing the rules you live by? And if the answer is nobody, how long until the substrate cracks?
I think that is the perfect thought to walk away with. Think of this software engineer tirelessly debugging that app, checking every single line of code against reality. Now think of the civilization we are building every single day. Look closely at the architecture around you.